Hello, and welcome to another new episode of ESL Talk.
We're your host, Daniel.
And Faye.
Last week, we looked at transitioning from an ESL student to an ESL teacher with Jose. We hope you enjoyed it. And today we'll be looking at the topic, fostering independent learning.
So what exactly is independent learning? How can we introduce it to our learners? And how can we foster this mindset as they progress and improve in their studies?
Yeah, I really love this choice of topic today. It's something actually quite simple that we can all do as teachers. And there's a number of techniques that we'll discuss today, along with our special guest, Fiona, who's going to join us a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
So, Faye, let's share our experiences of independent learning from our own teaching careers to date. What does independent learning mean to you exactly?
To me, independent learning is taking control of your own learning. And it is a student who is able to see what they need to do, understand what they should be doing in their own time, apart from being with the teacher, but just knowing what their goals are and what it is that they can do to achieve it rather than having everything spoon-fed to them.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that?
I think independent learning means taking charge and taking responsibility for your own learning, for your own process, for your own progress. Depending on the type of students that you work with, some students might be super motivated and they might be really aware of this, especially adult learners or older learners who have a specific goal. But maybe with younger ones, sometimes we need to remind them that, they're only going to get out what they put in. And if they try to follow what you advise and try to go along with the material that you're providing them, then they'll be more beneficial for them. So I think it's about taking responsibility and ownership of the learning process.
Yeah, I like that. It's the ownership idea, and it's not just the teacher that's responsible for your progress, right? And how do you encourage this in your different classes?
So again, it depends on the type of class that I'm teaching. So if we start with the very young ones, maybe the 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old students, with that it'll be more about gentle reminders and positive language. So reinforcement through please make sure you do this homework because it's going to help you to remember the key words, or asking questions like, do we know what we have to do for homework? Can you tell me? Can you repeat it back? So you can use basic things like that. And then with younger ones as well, it's about having good communication with parents, not too much, but just minimal of reminder. For example, Faye has 2 homework tasks to do for next class. It's A and B. Please let me know if anything isn't clear. And then that way you're kind of giving that responsibility to the student, but you're also being responsible for what you've done in the class as well.
Right.
Maybe for, high school age or teenage learners, it can be a little bit tricky because some of them don't necessarily have high motivation to want to learn everything. So with that, again, it's about kind of guiding them on that journey of, this is where we want to get to, this is what we need to do, and working with them a little bit in terms of, trying to gauge their mood or gauge their kind of, how can I say, their behavior. Maybe if, they're not being as responsive as usual, maybe just take the pressure off slightly and maybe pivot to something else. Or if, there's a particular skill they're finding very difficult, take a little bit of extra time to break it down and show them that you're listening, that you understand, and also that you're trying to help them. And then hopefully they'll give back and they'll reciprocate that in their classes. And then finally, with adult learners, similar to kind of teenage or older learners, keeping them on that path of, please do this. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're doing that. This is the outcome of this. So it's kind of outcome based. And if they can see that what they're doing works and that it's giving them the skills or the the functions that they need, then hopefully, again, they should be independent and doing what is required of them on their own.
Right. Yeah.
But we can obviously guide them as well. So for you, with your classes and your courses and what you teach, Faye, what are some easy strategies that you've used to instill independent learning?
So I always like to ask my students a lot of reflective questions, basically. At the end of a lesson, if I only see them once a week, or if I see them every day at the end of the week, I like to ask them, so what are you going to do this weekend to study what we've learned, or to keep practicing? Or at the end of a course, I just finished my 4-week online course last weekend, and I always finish it with asking my students to share what their plan is to maintain that knowledge that they've just acquired and to keep practicing. And I often that just catches them by surprise, because they're like, oh, I'm supposed to keep doing something.
So do you think that input kind of triggers or reminds students of, oh yeah, I better make sure that I'm continuously learning?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's shifting from me just telling them, keep practicing, don't forget, instead of me just going on a bit of a lecture about all that and the importance of homework and all that. I just basically, that's not even a question that you need to be practicing. It's just, how are you going to be practicing? And when you do that, for sure, that you automatically put that in their minds. Oh yeah, okay, so I have to do something. Maybe I should think about what I'll do or when. So if it's students that are more like ongoing regular students of mine, I like to have them from time to time come up with a study schedule, and then we adjust it. How many minutes a day or how many times a week are you going to study on your own? How many videos on YouTube are you going to watch, depending on what their goals are, right? Yeah. Keeping like a phrase book sometimes is a good way as well. It's an easy, simple strategy to teach students how to do, and then have them share with you from time to time which words they've learned from authentic sources and where they found it. And journaling is another thing I like to do a lot. So whenever I have a new student, I try to do like a needs assessment talk at the beginning, just to kind of gauge what their level is, but also what their goals are and what their perception of their ability is, and how much time they think they have, how much energy they think they can dedicate to this. And then usually when I send them their assessment, I give them tips on what to do. And those are all kind of things they can do on their own, like journaling, listening to a TED talk once a day, podcasts and things like that. Yeah.
So it's kind of reminding them, but in a focused way, right?
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. Yeah. And why do you think we need to be aware of all of these strategies as teachers for independent learning? Because we both use that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being aware of it, it's really helping you to connect with your students. If you're thinking about what's going to work best for your student in the lesson and also outside of the lesson, then that builds really good rapport and builds really good kind of trust in your process, and getting students to kind of get on side and kind of follow along with your plan or your kind of your methods for teaching. So I think that's really important. And like you mentioned earlier, by asking those why and how and those deeper kind of level questions, you're also getting students to think. And a lot of the time students are doing these things, but maybe they don't know why they're doing it or what's the purpose or what's the benefit. So motivation is going to be quite low. But if you can say to a student, like you mentioned, what are you going to do this weekend in terms of your English study? And they say, well, I'm going to watch a TED talk. Oh, okay. What kind of TED talk are you going to watch? What topic or what subject? This. Why? Because my job involves this, or my study involves this, or I want to do this in the future. Then again, you're connecting those dots for students and helping them to kind of see that, okay, yep, I should do this. This is going to help me. And the teacher understands this and the how exactly, like we mentioned.
Yeah. I also find that this helps them create that habit. So over time, you're just asking them that all the time, that eventually you don't have to ask it anymore. They'll be independent enough.
It becomes autonomous, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the goal.
Exactly. So do we think that, us as teachers, do we need to be independent learners as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope that that's the reason why most of our listeners are listening to us, right? They're independently trying to improve their own teaching and, get insights into other methods of doing things. And I think that's really crucial as teachers, especially nowadays, that there's just so much changing in the teaching world and technology and environment and the student profiles and needs. And nobody's going to teach you that. And if you keep just teaching the same way you were taught to teach, if you ever actually did a teacher training course, because not everybody has, it's just you're going to get behind all of this, and you're going to stay behind, and you won't be able to evolve with the times and keep up with the needs of the new students, right? What do you think?
I think it's really key. We need to constantly be learning new things, trying new things. And making mistakes, because that's really how we learn in everything that we do,
Yeah.
not just in terms of teaching.
On that note, actually,
yeah.
I read your book this weekend.
Oh,
That I
really?
found really useful. For our listeners that don't know this, Daniel wrote a really, really interesting guide on how to teach with online tools and like lots of practical tips. And as an independent learner teacher myself, I found that really helpful.
We'll be
As a
going into
resource.
that in a little bit more
Yeah.
detail in a future episode. Thank you for bringing that up, Faye.
Yeah.
That's great. So hopefully now we've learned a little bit more about what independent and autonomous learning is. We're going to now introduce our special guest, Fiona, who's going to share her expertise on this topic.
So welcome, Fiona. It's great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so are we. And first of all, that's how we usually start with our guests. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your teaching journey to date?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so my teaching journey is a little bit unusual, actually, but I'm going to be completely honest about it. Because I'm from the UK, up until quite recently, it was very easy for people from the UK to just go anywhere within the EU and teach. That's what happened to me when I wasn't actually qualified when I started teaching. I started teaching in 2011 really, and then properly in 2012. I went out to Spain because a Spanish friend of mine said, "Oh, you can get a job as an English teacher." And I thought, that sounds great, living in Spain, sunshine, beaches, brilliant. But then I discovered that I absolutely loved it. So then I started I did lots of professional development courses, an access course to go to uni. I studied Spanish language and intercultural communication at uni, and now I'm studying my master's in applied linguistics and TESOL. So I kind of started teaching and then got qualified to teach while teaching.
Sounds very familiar. It's pretty much my journey and
mine too.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Where are you doing your master's degree?
It's with Leicester University.
That makes three of us again.
Really? That's fantastic.
We both completed ours in 2018, was it? Yeah.
I think 2017. I think we overlapped though. Yeah.
Yeah, we overlapped
on the same course, which was very strange because you didn't realize till much later that we were.
Yeah, we didn't know each other. Yeah.
Small world.
Amazing.
Small world.
Maybe we can chat more about that later.
Right.
Absolutely.
Get some inside gossip.
So Fiona, tell me, obviously the topic today is about independent learning. So why did you decide to focus on this theme of independent learning, and how did you first learn about this topic yourself?
So I think you might sort of relate to this as well. The longer I have taught, as the years go on, and I just slowly have come to the conclusion that what I do isn't really teach. I don't really kind of give information to students. And when that does happen, it doesn't always really work that well either. So I think I just through seeing what works best with students, noticing the habits of my most effective learners, the students who perform best out of my classes, I just started noticing that those who kind of took control of their own learning, were much more engaged and kind of guided their own learning journey, were much more successful than the others. And of course, my own experience as well of going way back, my own initial state education, which wasn't so great. And also, just noticing how I have learned other languages as well. Just that conclusion that those people and those habits of taking more control, being more engaged with, shaping your own relationship with the learning makes for a much more effective and enjoyable learning process. So
Yeah, that really resonates. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast before about how we're pretty much facilitators, right?
Yeah.
We're not lecturers. We're not just providing knowledge, we're just helping our students. And that's the best way to do it, really. And Dan and I have talked about this already a little bit about what we think independent learning is, but how would you define independent learning, or what an independent learner is and what that means for us as teachers?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good question. So I kind of just said it then. So I guess it's a student or a learner who kind of embraces and takes control of their own learning. Somebody who is more active than passive in their learning. So, and I have had students before, I'm sure you have, who kind of come to class almost with this sort of figurative dinner plate and expect you to just put English on it.
Yeah.
So the independent learners are those who grab it and take control of it, and actually engage with it, and put the journey in the direction that they want the journey to go in. The interesting part of that question actually was, you said something about how does that relate to teachers as well, and I think that's a big misconception, as I think a lot of people think independent learning or autonomous learning is something that is done separately away from a teacher. It's students learning without the help of an educator,
their own time.
That it is that, but it's not just that.
Right.
It works hand in hand with an educator's guidance as well. It's not something that happens separately, or it doesn't have to be.
Wow, that's great. So we've kind of touched on this a little in terms of reflection as quite a big theme. So I know that's something you like to use, learning journals or diaries for your learners. Why do you like to use these? Why are these useful?
So it's so strange to me how these aren't more popular, because I think exactly that point that you made about reflecting, not just in our English classes or our language classes, but in general in life, right? When we do something and then we just move on to the next thing without thinking about what we've done, we don't learn from it. That's in all areas of life, but particularly when you're actively trying to learn something new. So when you're learning a new skill, a new language skill, you have to, after you've had a study session, or even after you've had an experience, an interaction in the language that you're learning, it's of huge benefit to then take some time to actually reflect on what happened, how you reacted to what happened, your feelings about what happened, what could have been done better, if you were to do that again, what you would do differently. Just asking yourself these questions about the experience so that you can take lessons from that and move forward. So I think they should be used way more. And something, I don't know if you want sort of a practical example of this or not.
Those are always useful.
So I think, because that's quite sort of, obscure, I guess, just saying reflect more. But as a teacher, you can actually guide your students more towards this. And something you can do is just start to use this kind of reflection, like 5-10 minutes at the end of the class, ask some questions to guide the students, what worked for you this lesson, what didn't, did anything make you uncomfortable? Why do you think that was? Are you proud of anything, or are you really the opposite of proud of anything this lesson? Questions like this that you can ask your learners. And at the start, you can just hand out paper, or if you're teaching online, however you're doing that, Google Doc or whatever, and you can read the students' responses, and you can start to make a habit of this. That's fantastic feedback for you as well as a teacher, because you can change how you're teaching, you can improve the experience for the learner, but you're also, in doing that, teaching the student to do that as well. And ultimately, I think the best journals, the best reflection happens when you think no one is watching, when you can be 100% honest. So I think, you can start introducing that in class as a teacher, as an educator, but eventually with the objective of kind of stepping back and just allowing your students to do that, teaching them the habit, but then letting them do it without you looking.
Yeah, that's great. It's very validating too, because I've been using journals as well for a while, and I tell still my current students, even the very advanced ones, to do it. And I hope if you're listening to this, students, see, I'm not the only one. There's a reason behind our methods.
2 acronyms that always stay with me from teacher training: WWW and EBI. What went well and even better if. So easy, simple things that we can do. And this ties in really nicely, because we've talked about feedback quite extensively on previous episodes. This is a really nice practical application. And this kind of ties into what I want to talk about next, which is about coaching. So not necessarily teaching, but coaching. How would you distinguish between coaching and teaching, Fiona?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a little bit how we mentioned before, when to sort of see yourself as the giver of information, or to kind of see yourself as somebody who guides your students to actually make sense of information. That's really the biggest difference for me. And I guess in some ways, as your students' level advances, you can kind of move from a more teacher stance to a more of a coach approach. But yeah, for me, that's the main difference. Was that your question? What's the difference?
It was. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think as well, one other thing I do actually, in one of my roles, I do quite a lot of this, and I kind of try to tie in the ideas of critical thinking. And for more advanced learners, how can we gain a deeper understanding, a better knowledge? How can we maybe not repeat, but maybe teach others what we've learned? And how can we process everything and analyze it in different ways? So I think coaching ties in really well to those higher order skills.
Absolutely. I think coaching or language advising, which I guess is really, really similar.
Yes.
Is exactly that. Like getting the student, because everybody learns differently, right? And as you just said, some people process information much better, in reproducing it, and other people learn much better when they're sort of physically engaged with whatever the topic is. And I guess in the same way as a journal would get students to reflect on that, language advising, I think, works in much the same way, but in a more sort of perhaps more guided, usually one-to-one context.
Right.
And I think that works better as well in traditions where there is more of that culture of the teacher being the giver. I think when I say culture, I don't just mean like countries, but also educational cultures as well. Different institutions have different cultures of, some places are very, this is the teacher, shut up students, listen to the teacher.
Very teacher-centered, And we kind of touched on like advanced learners and different cultures and things like that already, but does your approach vary between groups or on individual learning? Do you do something differently depending on the kind of students you have?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of this, right? Because different people learn in different ways, which means that different students, if they are truly engaged in their learning and guiding the process, their journey will look individual. It will look unique. Of course, there are things that every single student needs, which you can provide as a teacher, and you can guide. But I think, and even within a group, you have different people in that group, the dynamic, what you're doing in that group is going to look very different as well. In terms of whether my approach is different from one-to-one students to group classes, I think something I love doing is sharing, getting students to share. I mean, in a group class, if you have a community of students, and that's the key word, I think, making your group class a community. You can really, you've got maybe, 6 or 10 or sometimes 30 different students who have 30 different perspectives, 30 different stories, 30 different sets of routines, habits, resources that they go to. And that is a bank that you can pull from whenever and bring it out and then give it to everybody in that class. So
Wonderful. You've kind of very, very nicely just transitioned to the next thing I wanted to ask you about.
Excellent.
Resources.
Okay.
So what are some resources that teachers and students can use to help them begin implementing independent learning? We've talked about a journal or a diary, but what are some other easy things we can do?
So I think, three things. Sharing, so building that bank where, students bring their own resources and own suggestions and own ideas to classes. I teach in an online context, so I use a lot of kind of digital stuff, and having a kind of a bank of resources, particularly if it's been built by the students, is a really nice resource to build. It's easy to build. And also when the students have had a real say in that, then they're generally more engaged with it as well. The learning journal, I think, is a great one. Especially if you're teaching in person, like literally, a physical book is a great idea. Everybody loves a new notebook, right? So,
yeah.
And the other thing I think is still there's a big gap in terms of digital literacy when it comes to the wealth of online tools, free online tools that you can use. Even just things like Trello. Notion is a really nice one as well.
Yeah.
So kind of working with students, maybe sort of showing them these different tools by using them in class, but also showing them how they can use those tools in order to organize their own learning and resources as well. If you show a learner how to use Notion to put all of their digital learning resources in one place, organized in a way that works for them, then that's a tool which is probably going to be used by them because it's been personalized by them as well. So
yeah, that's very true. We have almost too much out there right now. There's so much in terms of technology and apps, and that it's just overwhelming. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, even on my Instagram, to my followers. Like you sometimes you follow so many teachers. There's just so much information, and students are just scrolling.
Yeah,
and it's just like it's worse. So even things like learning the save feature on Instagram, and then organizing the posts into folders, like little things like that. It could be really helpful, like Notion and Trello would be as well. Now, for some teachers that are starting out trying to this technique and trying to help their students become more independent learners, what are some simple and easy wins that teachers can use right away in their classroom with their students?
I was thinking about this question. So this one's tricky. I don't know if there are any sort of quick wins with this. I would say just pick one thing, whether you're, giving them a digital tool or resource to use. If you have group classes or even multiple individual learners, try to get them in a community. That's something which can really work, whether you have like a space on your website or even a Facebook group, or just somewhere where they can kind of get together. Community learning, group learning, collaborative learning there are so many. I mean, this could be a whole different podcast, but there are so many advantages to that. So, if that's an easy thing for a new teacher to do, I think, is just to get, if you don't already have a community of your students, if they're not connected, then connect them. I don't know, for easy wins, I guess just try one thing, one of the things that we've been talking about today, and just see how your students react. Just see, let it be student led. That's independent learning. Autonomous learning is led by the student or the students. So gauge their reactions and see how it goes.
Absolutely. And I think the joys as well of teaching, because we've all been there, we've tried things that maybe didn't work well, and then we can reflect on that, and then we can obviously make sure next time it's more effective and more efficient, and hopefully students can also follow that theory in practice anyway. Just one more thing to ask, Fiona. What advice would you give to new teachers who might be getting started or have maybe only heard about these things for the first time?
Oh, good question.
We're full of them.
Guess... Sorry, say again?
I said we're full of them.
You are today. I don't know. I guess just to have a read and research. I think for new teachers, I don't know if you find this as well. Sometimes our egos can get in the way when we're new teachers, right? Because we're just qualified or whatever, or we just started. Maybe there's still a little bit of insecurity there because of the lack of experience. And I think there is a big misconception, as we said before, that encouraging learners to be more autonomous, encouraging them to think critically, to ask questions and guide their own learning, sometimes that can feel quite threatening. If that's not your own educational experience, if that's not an educational culture that you are currently working in, or if you're used to, or your students aren't used to, and if you're quite new as well, you've come out of your teacher training, you've got your rules of how it's done. It can feel quite threatening, I suppose, to try to sort of just say, well, actually, I'm no longer a teacher. Nothing I say is right or wrong. You, the students, I'm here just to guide you. I'm not the fountain of knowledge. Sometimes I think it can feel quite threatening. So maybe that's just something I would say to new teachers who are trying to foster independence in their students, is just to not take it as, try to just step back, remove your ego from it. It's something that will make you a better teacher. It doesn't take any power away from you as an educator.
That's very true. It's the whole idea of control, right? Because it might feel like you're losing control of the class, but you're not really. You're transferring some autonomy over to the students. That's great. A great point.
Perfect. You summarized that so much better than
that's easy to do once you've done all of the hard work. Just have to do the one-liner.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Fiona. I really enjoyed listening to your expertise on independent learning, and hopefully our listeners can start to use or maybe follow some of this in the future. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you for all of the super interesting questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. A huge thank you to Fiona for sharing her expert knowledge on independent learning. We hope you're able to start implementing some of these strategies into your own teaching practice.
And if you would like to get involved in a future episode, or if you have questions or feedback, you can get in touch with us via Instagram at ESL Talk Podcast, or you can send us an email to esltalkpodcast@gmail.com.
Also, you can join us individually on Instagram.
For me, it's at Learning with Faye. Faye is F-E-Y.
Or I'm Daniel Teacher. So next week, we're going to be talking about lesson planning. It's going to be a pretty long, extended episode. So we look forward to you joining us then. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you then.